Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our read-along of Anthony Trollope's 1883 novel, Mr. Scarborough's Family. Anthony Trollope, of course, is famous for two books in series, the Barschitzer series and the Palliser books. But for 2020, we are reading his standalone novels. We're reading a sample of his standalone novels. There's quite a few. We couldn't do them all in 1 year, but we're reading a sampling of his standalone novels. So for the year 2020, we are consorting with Lonely Trollops, books that are not part of any series. And this book deals with a man named John Scarborough who has led an unconventional life. He has scorned the law. He hasn't been a criminal. He's made a good name for himself, and he has a property in the English countryside, Tretton Park, that was a good living anyway for a country squire, but has become much, much better living because there's a pottery works that's on the premises that uses the local water, that uses the local labor, and that makes an enormous profit. So Tretton Park has become valuable. And John Scarborough has always been at odds with the law, not in a criminal sense, but in a sense of that he doesn't like to be told what to do. He doesn't like that the law is, as he puts it, an old woman when it comes to timidity and to brooking his will. He doesn't like his will brooked in any way. And one of the laws, of course, that he hates the most is the old Law of Entail, which said that an owner such as John Scarborough, who owns a property such as Tretton Park, could not do whatever he wanted with it. Instead, it was entailed on his eldest male heir. So he couldn't sell it, and he couldn't break it up without extensive legal permission. He had to pass it. He was legally enjoined to pass Tretton Park on to his eldest male heir. And there wasn't anything he could do about that. Mr. Scarborough says in many, many points in this book, including in the chapters that we're reading today, says that that is outrageous. He should be able to do with his own property what he wants. Now, we can see with hindsight what the wisdom behind the Law of Entail. It's probably saved more inheritances than it's lost. It's probably been a boon more than it's been a bane to most landowners, especially to most landowners' heirs. If you're an heir, you're going to be very happy for the Law of Entail. And John Scarborough has two heirs. He has two sons, his eldest, Montjoy, and his youngest, Augustus. And over the course of time, chafing under the Law of Entail, Mr. Scarborough realizes that his oldest son, Montjoy, is an incurable gambling addict. He simply cannot help himself. Any money that comes into his hands will go out of his hands like water. He's not one of these people who can build an empire on gambling. He loses more than he wins, as all gamblers do. And over time, and over constantly paying his debts and constantly getting him out of one financial scrape after another, and especially after realizing that Montjoy is raising post-obits on Tretton Park itself. That is a kind of loan from loan sharks that Trollope too often calls simply the Jews. They're not all Jews, and not all Jews in Trollope are like that, but so that's a subject for another time. Oh my God. that is this author's Achilles heel. That is why I predict that he will no longer be taught in colleges in our new Puritan age, in our age that encourages censorship. But nevertheless, you all know from having read him with me for 2 years now that this is a great author. And that even if he was what we consider to be a dyed-in-the-wool, just out-and-out anti-Semite, he'd still be worth reading. That is a horrible thought to the modern Puritans, the modern censors of today. They say, well, if you're going to grant that, then no. Not only do you not read him, but no one does. And not only does no one read him, but we burn his books in public. And we're happy about that. But I'm still a book person. Yeah, I'm advocating book burning, but I'm still a book person. Anyway, that also is a rant for another time. Montjoy, it comes to Mr. Scarborough's attention, has raised a huge number of post-obits on Tretton Park. And that is a kind of loan where the loaners only get to cash in when the owner dies. It's a post-obit is something that Montjoy Scarborough can raise specifically because of the Law of Entail. Because he can go to a loan shark and say, well, I don't have any money now, but this property is going to be mine. There's nothing that my father can do about that. The Law of Entail says this will be mine. So what I want to do is raise money now for a loan from you now, sometimes an enormous amount, 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. What I want to do now is raise an enormous amount of money as a loan from you now on that assurance. So I can't pay you back now, but when I inherit, you can take it out of the estate. And because Montjoy is a gambling addict, it quickly becomes obvious to Mr. Scarborough that if something isn't done, the post-obits will easily exceed the worth of Tretton Park entirely. The whole thing will be gone. The whole thing will disappear into the hands of strangers. who will start measuring the fields and measuring the carpets and testing the staircases because it'll be their property and it'll be gone from the Scarborough family. Mr. Scarborough doesn't like that. He doesn't like the law of entail. And he doesn't like the fact that his eldest son is a spendthrift who he cannot trust. And he comes up with a way around it. He shocks the world by producing documents, first to his family lawyer, Mr. Gray. We've seen Mr. Gray, and we've met Mr. Gray's daughter, the absolute light of his life, Dolly Gray. And we'll talk more about her in a minute. But Mr. Scarborough reveals first to his lawyer and then gradually to the world that Montjoy Scarborough is illegitimate. He is not actually the eldest son. Mr. Scarborough was not married to Montjoy's mother at the time of his birth. And he has the paperwork to prove it. 25-year-old paperwork to prove it. An absolutely ironclad case. At first, Mr. Gray, his lawyer, does not believe him because he knows what kind of a scoundrel Mr. Scarborough is. But Mr. Scarborough shows him the documentation. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever. It's all there in black and white. Mr. Scarborough was willing to go to his grave without the world knowing that before he thought that Montjoy was hopeless. But now that he thinks that's true, and now that he's been, frankly, insulted by all of those post-obits that are just waiting on him to die. He's a sick man when we meet him in this book. He has a surgeon cutting him every single chapter. Now that he knows that, he reveals it to the world. And suddenly, all of those creditors, all of those loan sharks, are out in the wind. They have all those notes, all those promissory notes, all those post-obits with Montjoy Scarborough's name on them, but Mr. Scarborough's second son, Augustus, has never signed anything. Mr. Scarborough himself, as we're told over and over again, has never put his name on a piece of paper. All of those debts were incurred by Montjoy, and it turns out he was as defrauded as the rest of the world and does not stand to inherit anything. Does not have any money at all of his own and is never going to have any money. Is, in the pitiless terminology of the time, a nobody. Those creditors are outraged. Where is all their money? It's gone. It's absolutely gone. And suddenly, Tretton Park is devolved to Augustus Scarborough, who is now the eldest, and who is not a spendthrift. In fact, he's just the opposite, and he's a lot of opposites to Montjoy Scarborough. Montjoy Scarborough is a clod and a spendthrift and a gambler and a wastrel, but there's a core to him that you can't help but like. He's pathetic, but he's not hateable. He's not contemptible. And everybody knows that. Everybody feels that about him. And as the book goes on, they feel it more. His brother, Augustus? No. His brother, we met it. I read a description of him last time. His brother, Augustus, is a snake. A horrible, unfeeling creature. Evil and creepy and censorious and a bully. And also completely heartless. He doesn't feel anything for his brother, and he doesn't feel anything for his father either. And when he learns that he is the heir to Tretton Park, he goes there and starts to lord it over, starts to invite people over without asking his father's permission, makes it pretty clear to his father that he's just waiting for the old man to die. A process of revelation happens. John Scarborough was never all that. I get the impression he was never all that fond of either of his children, but I don't think he really knew his son Augustus until all this happened, and what he learns he does not like at all. And what he learns of Montjoy he starts increasingly to like. Montjoy, first of all, in the early part of the book he disappears. He has a midnight, a 2 a.m. encounter with Harry Annesley, the young swain, the young suitor of Florence Montjoy, Montjoy's first cousin, who was always going to be his wife. Somewhere down the line, it was just assumed on the part of her family and Mr. Scarborough's family that they would marry. But Harry Annesley slipped in, and she professes her love for him, not for Montjoy. And that upset Montjoy, and of course that piled on the sudden revelation of him being illegitimate, meant that when he and Harry met at 2 a.m. outside in London, there was physical violence, and Harry Annesley easily had the best of Montjoy and left him for dead. Turns out he wasn't dead. He wasn't even really injured. But he did disappear for a little while, which drew the attention of the police to Harry Annesley. Eventually, wondering, it appears that you were the last person to see him alive. What do you know that you're not telling us? And at first, Harry Annesley tells the police and Augustus Scarborough that he doesn't know anything. And later on in the course of the book, it turns out that's a lie, and everyone knows that it's a lie, including Mr. Prosper. a local squire who has raised Harry Annesley as almost a son, certainly acknowledged to everyone that Harry was his heir and would never need to take on a profession because he would inherit the old house and the acreage and whatnot. Not a lot of money, but enough so that he could be in a minor way a gentleman of leisure. Once Mr. Prosper learns that Harry has told a lie, Mr. Prosper is a moron. he is a classic Trollope moron who everybody holds in contempt. And there's a horrible moment in the chapters that we're reading today where he absolutely realizes that everyone laughs at him all the time, that no one takes him seriously. There are characters like that in other Victorian literature, most famously in the early chapters of Middlemarch. This is a classic portrait of such a character. Mr. Prosper is a buffoon, and he doesn't know it. He's the only one who doesn't know it. And when he learns that his chosen golden boy heir has told a lie, he threatens to disinherit him. And he thinks that one of the easiest ways to do that and make it definitive would be to have an heir of his own. So he goes a courting. And that wraps up in the chapters that we're reading today, that little subplot where he seeks to find a wife, and the woman that he picks is... It's a classic Trollope comedy subplot. I've been hearing from a lot of you that you have really been enjoying Mr. Prosper's wooing. and that explodes in the chapters that we're reading today. She just becomes insufferable. It's not just that she insists on ponies of her own. It's that she's be-Petering him. She's constantly calling him Peter, his name, but he doesn't like it. There's a great moment, a classic throwaway comic moment, where Mr. Prosper is telling his sister all about it, how horrible this woman is, how she's constantly be-Petering him in his own home, in that horrible voice of hers. And at one point in their conversation about it, his sister refers to him by his name. She calls him Peter, and he winces. And she makes a mental note never to call him by his name again, because it's become this horrible thing. But that doesn't work out. And Montjoy Scarborough, in the course of the book, has allowed rumors to reach Mr. Prosper about Harry Annesley, and he's done it specifically out of spite. He's done an Augustus thing. He's done it specifically out of spite to hurt Harry because Harry has Florence Montjoy's affections. And in the course of the chapters that we're reading today, Montjoy corrects that, writes a letter to Mr. Prosper, and then goes in person to tell him face to face, you have been misled and I have had a hand in it. Harry is blameless. Yes, he technically told a kind of lie, but no gentleman could have done otherwise. And if you hold it against him, you are doing him a wrong. And the reason Montjoy does that is because, as we're told in these chapters, he has, in the course of time, losing a fight to Harry, losing Florence Montjoy, losing his inheritance, being dependent on his odious brother for handouts of spending money. In that time, he has, as we're told, developed a facility for self-condemnation. He has changed. He has grown a bit. It hasn't fixed him. He's still a gambling addict, although he says, and so does Mr. Gray, say what he needs is a wife. Not just, as a helpmeet and someone to talk to, but also that if he comes into money, it should all be on his wife. It should all be in her name, so that he has no access to anything. Montjoy himself says, if Florence Montjoy would marry me, I would change my ways. Now, you don't know that that's true. In fact, it's probably not true. Addicts can't change their ways. Not just for the sake of a good woman. That almost never happens. But it turns out that it's not a theoretical concern, because as Mr. Scarborough becomes more and more disillusioned with his younger son, he decides, well, the Law of Entail says that I have to pass this property on to my eldest male heir. But only the property. I don't have to pass on anything else. I could strip this place bare if I wanted to. I could cut down every tree if I had the time to do it. I could sell every piece of cattle. And what I want now is to drop a new will in which I settle all of the movables. The books in the library, including extremely collectible volumes. The furniture, including extremely collectible volumes. The plate, including stuff that I'm keeping in London because it's so valuable. I want to settle all of that on Montjoy, not on Augustus. He can have the property, but he can have it bare. All the pictures, all the books, all the property, all the furniture, that will all go to Montjoy. It's a huge amount of money. It'd be $1,500 a year, or £1,500 a year, which would be enough to live in luxury if you weren't an absolutely bottomless gambling addict, which Montjoy is, and everyone tells Mr. Scarborough giving him any money is useless. But he decides on it anyway, and he decides to go a little further. He invites Montjoy to Tretton Park. Now, Montjoy is furious with his father, not so much for disinheriting him, as we learn more about this new Montjoy, this person who has become accustomed to self-condemnation. Excuse me. As we learn more about him, we realize the thing that really bothers him is what this whole thing says about his mother, his late mother. That it's a slur on her name. To the point where he says, I can't forgive my father for doing that. And won't visit him. I won't go to his home, even though he's too sick to leave his home. He's too sick to leave Tretton Park. And Mr. Scarborough likes that about Montjoy. So does Mr. Grey. Likes it about him, that he feels that way about his mother. Certainly, it's not hard to remember that Augustus Scarborough has not felt anything like that. Nothing at all like that. All he feels is an impatience to inherit. That's all. Montjoy feels a little more than that. But he does go to Tretton Park. And Mr. Scarborough invites Harry as well at the same time. And it's an amazing moment. Montjoy Scarborough, no matter what else you might say about him, at that moment when Harry steps out of the carriage at Tretton Park, Montjoy Scarborough makes a perfectly nice apology. I was outside of myself. I didn't know myself. Of course I apologize for what I did. It was totally unworthy. And Harry accepts it. They spend days shooting on the estate. And they spend suppers together. They might never be best friends, but it's a wonderful moment. And like so many moments, like the moments between Dolly Grey and her father, like so many moments like that, it's totally human. It's just totally wonderful the way it's done with so little stress, so little fuss. I want to read you. I want to read you a bit of an exchange between Dolly and her father. I think it'll be the last one. I've laid a little stress on her because she's one of my favorite minor characters in Trollope. But at one point, Mr. Grey's law partner comes to their home and asks her to be his wife. Of course, her answer is no. And when her father asks her, she describes it. She says, he says, would it not be better for you to be married? And she says, if I could choose my husband. And her father says, whom would you choose? And she says, you. And he says, that is nonsense. I am your father. And she says, you know what I mean. There is no one among my circle of acquaintances with whom I should care to live. There is no one else with whom I should care to do more than die. When I look at it all round, it seems to be absolutely impossible that I should on a sudden entertain habits of close intimacy with one such as your partner. What should I say to him when he went forth in the morning? How should I welcome him when he came back at night? What would be our breakfast? What would be our dinner? Think what are yours and mine. And here she describes, and this is just wonderful, this description, all the little solicitudes, all the free abuse, all the certainty of an affection that has grown through so many years, all the absolute assurance on the part of each that the one does not really know, that the one really does know the inner soul of the other. That's just wonderful. And that's what Dolly wants, and she can't get it with her father's partner as far as she's concerned. There was another thing that I wanted to read you here, though, where, let's see here. Yes, where this is Mr. Scarborough, where he says he's describing to his young caretaker of his what's left of his life, and the young caretaker says, a man does not want to die, I suppose. And Mr. Scarborough says, there are various ways of looking at that question. Many men desire the prolongation of life as a lengthened period of enjoyment. There is perhaps something of that feeling with me, but when you see how far I am crippled and curtailed, how my enjoyments are confined to breathing the air, to eating and drinking, to the occasional reading of a few pages, you must admit there cannot be much of that. A conversation with you is the best of it. Some want to live for the sake of their wives and children. In the ordinary acceptance of the words, that is all over with me. Many desire to live simply because they fear to die. There is nothing of that in me, I can assure you. I am not afraid to meet my Creator. But there are those who wish for that life so that their purpose of love or stronger purposes of hatred may be accomplished. I am among the number. But on the account, I only wish it till those purposes have been completed. I think I'll go to sleep for an hour, but there are a couple of letters I want to write you before post time. And there you have it. There you have Mr. Scarborough in a nutshell, is that he has a reason to live. It's not that he needs more enjoyment, because he can't enjoy anything anymore. His surgeon is cutting him up every once in a while. And it's not because he loves his children. It's because he has a purpose in mind. And his purpose originally, in surviving, because when we see him early in the book, he almost dies. His purpose in surviving is to thwart the law. The law of entail said that he has to give this to a spendthrift. I am going to thwart the law. No matter what the world has to say about it, I am going to say my eldest son is illegitimate and thwart the law. And we start to realize that he might have another plan in mind. That we start to realize that he doesn't like the result of his plan. His plan was to disinherit his eldest son, to put his hard-earned estate in the safe hands of his second son. But the more he gets to know that second son, the less he likes that plan. And he doesn't care, we realize, so much about that estate as he cares about not having his will brooked. That's the thing he doesn't like. He doesn't like having things happen that he can't control. But we also get... I want to read you a little bit about this comic creation, this Uncle Prosper, Harry's the old squire who is trying to navigate a new wife and also rectitude with his alleged heir. He writes a letter. Trollope's letters are always wonderful. He writes a letter. Under the existing circumstances, you will, I think, be surprised at a letter written in my handwriting, but facts have arisen which make it expedient that I should address you. I'm about to read a passage that my fellow Americans may find a little bit hard. Because when Harry thinks he's been dispossessed, he thinks, well, I don't have anything for me here. I have no right to ask for Florence's hand in marriage if I can't support her. So I guess I'll just go to America, try and make my fortune in the gold fields or in the stock market or whatever. And word of that gets to Mr. Prosper. He writes, you are about, I am informed, to proceed to the United States, a country against which I acknowledge I entertain a serious antipathy. They are not a gentlemanlike people, and I am given to understand that they are generally dishonest in their dealings. Their president is a low person, and all their ideas of government are pettifogging. Their ladies, I am told, are very vulgar, though I have never had the pleasure of knowing one of them. They are an irreligious nation and have no respect for the established Church of England or her bishops. I should be very sorry that my heir should go among them. With reference to my stopping the income which I have hitherto allowed you, it was a step I took on best advice, nor can I allow it to be thought that there is any legal claim upon me for continuance of that payment. But I am willing for the present to continue it on full understanding that you at once give up your American project. But there is a subject on which it is essentially necessary that I should receive from you as my heir a full and complete explanation. Under what circumstances did you beat Captain Scarborough in the streets late on the night of the 3rd of June last? And how did it come to pass that you left him bleeding, speechless, and motionless on that occasion? He wants clarification. That's the point in which he stuck his pride. As I am about to continue the payment of the sum hitherto allowed, this is Trollope making sure you know in the course of this letter that this guy's a buffoon and you're not supposed to like him. I think it is only fitting that I should receive this explanation under your own hand. I am your affectionate uncle, Peter Prosper. And then he adds a postscript about his doomed love affair. A rumor may probably have reached you of a projected alliance between me and a young lady belonging to a family with which your sister is about to connect herself. It is right that I should tell you there is no truth in this report. He wants to eat his cake and have it too. He wants to be right in condemning Harry, and also right in suddenly making up with him, making him his heir again. But anyway, that ends our chapters today. Sorry to go on at length, but I love this book so much. And next Sunday, we're going to finish Mr. Scarborough's family. So there's no reason for me to give you chapters. You're just going to read to the end. And those of you who've been reading along so far, I'll leave my email down below. You're free to email me about any subject at all, but I love hearing those of you who've been reading along with this. I've been enjoying it. This was Trollope's last serious novel, and it shows that when he has magic, he can still bring it on the page. And therefore I've been gratified to learn that a lot of you have been really loving this book, loving all of its comic subplots, loving all the main plot. And quite a few of you, I'm very glad to hear that even after 100 years, this thing does not lose its magic. It doesn't lose its ability to pull people in and have them basically on the edge of their seat wondering about what's going to happen with the plot. And you might think that you now know that Mr. Scarborough has another scheme up his sleeve, that he's going to strip the property, so it will still be entailed to Augustus Scarborough, who none of you like, and you shouldn't. But all the stuff in it, the cattle, the crops, the money, the townhouse in London, the plate, the furniture, the books, all of that will go to Mountjoy Scarborough, so that Augustus will inherit bare property, and that's all. He'll have to build it up from scratch. Which, if you're familiar with English country estates, that can be a lot. That's the patrimony of generations that he is thinking of settling now. He is now planning to settle that on Mountjoy, simply because he dislikes the way Augustus Scarborough has behaved. And a lot of you are reading this book and you're thinking, okay, well, you've been sort of hinting that Mr. Scarborough has another scheme up his sleeve, and now we know what it is. That's what he's going to do. He isn't going to break the law of entail, but he is going to strip the property bare and give it to a son he knows will spend it in the course of a year. And as we are perched now to finish the book, to read to the end, I feel justified in telling you that's not true. There's one more scheme that Mr. Scarborough has, and it is unthinkable. It is unthinkable. It is an absolute comic masterpiece that concludes this book. Some of you, in your wildest imagination, might be able to pick what it is, might be able to figure out what's the one thing that Mr. Scarborough has not yet done that he could still do in this book. I don't want to spoil it for the rest of you, but oh boy, are you going to love the rest of this book. And I believe, we'll see next week, but I believe that this will be an absolute winner, that you will, all of you will be very glad you read this thing and want to reread it. No Trollope rereadings on this channel, okay? I know you're all loving this, and I'm so gratified that this author has brought me so much pleasure. He's pleasing all the rest of you too, but he wrote plenty of books. We don't have to reread anything. I think a couple of people have put the scandalous proposition forward that we should reread the Palliser books. No. Let's just forge on. So we're going to finish Mr. Scarborough's Family next Sunday, and then we will move right on after that to The American Senator. A book of a very different nature, with lots of different characters, but still done in a high comic tone, I believe. It's not one of Trollope's rare tragic or bitter books, I don't think. But we'll talk more about that next week. So there you go. We're continuing on with Mr. Scarborough's Family, and we'll finish up next week. As usual, I want to know all about what you're thinking. And I'm going to wrap this up for now. I've once again gone long, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.